The 90s were a pretty magical time for me. I had just graduated high school. Michael Jordan had led the Chicago Bulls to 6 NBA championships. The World Wide Web was just getting started, and this was the time full suspension mountain bikes were starting to come on the market. Mountain bikes back then were all rigid 26ers. If you were lucky, you had a front suspension fork, which is usually filled with elastomers, which are, let's say, little rubber cylinders that were a little squishy. And those act as the springs. We've come a long way. Of course, the next evolution in mountain bike technology was going to be the dual suspension mountain bike. That's what we called them back then, dual suspension. We didn't call them full suspension, they were dual suspension because there was front and back. Anyway, some of the first bikes like the Trek Y bike and some others I can't remember. I only remember the Y bike. I remember seeing them in the store and I was amazed, and there was no way I thought I could afford one of those. So fast forward a couple years, about mid-90s I think, I was able to squirrel away enough money for this. This is my GT RTS 2, what's left of it at least. Regarded by some as the first competitive full suspension mountain bike. Julie Furtado won the 1992 World's Downhill with this bike, not this exact bike, but an RTS. And it was actually her first time riding it. Maybe third time, but she'd never raced with it before. So we're gonna dig deep in the archives and take a look at my RTS 2. Starting at the front, we have a RockShox Mag 21 fork. This is actually, I think it is the first air oil fork. So there's actually air in both sides and dampers in both sides. Actually, they're not dampers. These little dials here, they adjust the threshold with which this starts compressing. They covered the stanchions. These little rubber boots, accordion boots. Ooh, I should measure that. See how big these stanchions are. Stanchions are whopping 25.43, which is, I'm pretty sure is just an inch. No disc brakes here. These are actually cantilever brakes. If you don't remember cantilever brakes, these were before V-brakes. So V-brakes were about late 90s. Compared to brakes these days, these were terrible. Steering duties are handled by this 130 millimeter stem and probably, I think it was like a 500 to 600 millimeter wide aluminum handlebar. What else did I run? There was Shimano index shifters. This was a 3x8 system. I think, what grips did I have? I think I had the John Tomac grips. They're kind of like big waffles. Rear suspension handled by this no-lean coil shock. The only adjustment is this preload, which is turning this collar here. The rear triangle is on a rocker down here. So as the rear wheel went up, it's actually pulled this, causing your rocker to twist clockwise in the direction we're seeing here and compress the shock. The benefit of this rocker tuned suspension is as you pedal, it actually pushed the rear tire down. Very good anti-bob qualities here. Back here, another set of cantilever brakes. I only had the stock Shimano cantilevers here. If you look here, there's this little saddle that helped translated the cable pull from the side to the middle. Rear derailleur was a Shimano Deore XT, I believe. 8-speed shifter. In this bottom bracket shell used to live a super heavy square taper cartridge bottom bracket. 3 chainring crank, and I don't even remember how long my crank arms were. Other cool features were how the cables ran. Cables actually ran in housing up to this point, and then it was open cable down to these little tubes with these little plastic liners in them to help reduce the friction. And then it went to here where there was another short piece of cable housing. From here to here, open cable again, cable housing to the derailleur. And it's the same thing on the other side for the shifter and the brake. I think the idea back then was to reduce as much cable to housing friction as possible. Now, you cannot talk bikes from the 90s without mentioning purple anodized parts. And I got them. Look at these. These are, I had these wheels custom built for me. I saw these hubs in the shop and I had to have them. These are Pulsar straight pull spoked hubs. So before Mavic or any of those other guys came out with straight pull spokes, there were these guys, Pulsar. I don't know what happened to them today. Also, check out this tiny 8-speed cassette. So rim width on this, actually I looked at the sticker, they're 17 millimeters internal width. Wow. So unfortunately, this bike has a crack in the frame. Basically where this rocker connection is welded to the bottom bracket, there's a hairline crack. Another thing about these bikes, the rear triangle is a little bit flexy. The last ride I did on this, I was noticing my crank arm was hitting the chainstay. I can't tell if it was from the crack or because it's just flexy. All right, here's probably the most interesting quirk about this bike, and only this bike. When I bought this, it did not have a serial number on it, like most factory manufactured bikes. So for them to sell it, they actually had to stamp a serial number into it, which was a serial number of my choosing, which is 4 digits here, stamped in by the shop. So the story they told me is that this bike was on display at GT headquarters or GT factory, and somehow they got it to sell. So it could be a pre-production model, who knows? But that's the interesting quirk about this bike. I forgot to mention one thing. I used to ride this off like 5-foot ledges, like huck to flat pretty much. That was back in probably college days. That's probably what led to this thing cracking. I really did beat the crap out of this thing. So, thanks for joining me on this dive into the archives, my old GT RTS 2. If you like this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you're notified of any future videos. Thanks for watching, be safe, be kind to each other. I also need to mention, on my handlebars, I had something that was called bar ends. If you remember bar ends, they were extra little horns that stuck on the end of your handlebars. Give you an extra place to grip when climbing or handling technical sections. We don't use these today for good reason, and I've got a funny story. I got my first modern mountain bike maybe 10 years ago. It was a 26er, but it was right when 29ers were coming into play, so I bought a 26er because the previous owner bought a 29er. On this 26er, I was like, oh, I need to get some bar ends. So I put some bar ends on, and first ride, no joke, bar end snags on a vine hanging on the side of the trail, and of course yanks my handlebar sideways and I go down. So after that ride I took them off. I have not used bar ends since, and I'm a pretty firm believer of not using bar ends because they're just asking for snags and they're gonna put you down.